Rancher. Every time she bent to lift a bucket or reach for a rail, he felt accused by her words before she ever spoke them. And if you want Wild West stories that grip you by the collar, challenge your morals and twist your expectations about power, pride, and respect, then subscribe now and stay with this journey to the end. Because this isn't just a tale about a man being watched, it's about a nation learning to look at itself honestly, and begins here to bend in the dust in the wide. Honest cruelty of the frontier, where the land judged a person more fairly than people ever did. Elias Crow believed he had learned the hardest lesson a rancher could learn. Mind your work. Mind your eyes, and let the dust swallow your thoughts before they turned into sins. Yet on the morning the accusation finally came out, loud, sharp as a cracked whip in public, as the son did not come from a rival rancher or a town preacher, but from Mara Quinn, the school teacher sent west with chalk on her hands and steel in her spine. A woman who bent to the work of survival with the same determination as any man, and who had noticed, with the quiet intelligence that education breeds, how silence can be louder than words. Because every time she bent down in the corral to fix a gate, or stooped by the well to draw water, or crouched to gather scattered pages blown from her satchel, she felt the weight of eyes she refused to name until the truth demanded air. And when she finally said it, "Don't you dare deny it," the ranch seemed to hold its breath, the horses shifting, the wind pausing, as if even nature understood that this was not about desire, but about dignity. About who gets to exist unobserved and who must always carry the burden of being seen. And Elias, raised by a father who taught him that a man's character was measured by what he did when no one was watching, felt the accusation land not because it was true in the way gossip loves truth, but because it forced him to confront a deeper failing, the habit of unexamined power, the way the frontier trained men to look without asking permission, simply because there was no one to stop them. And as he stood there with dust on his boots and a lifetime of hard work in his hands, he realized that morality on the frontier wasn't about rules written in books, but about choices made in moments like this, where apology could either be a performance or the first step toward change. And Mara, who had crossed rivers and buried fear under purpose to teach children in a land that barely believed. Women belonged outside kitchens, did not want his shame. She wanted his understanding. Because education, she believed, was not just for children, but for men who had never been taught to question themselves. And as the day stretched on and whispers from the bunkhouse hinted at scandal while the sun traced slow arcs across the sky, the ranch became a classroom where both of them learn that respect is not the absence of wrongdoing, but the presence of accountability. A lesson as necessary to the building of a just society as fences were to the taming of wild land. And in that first confrontation, before twists of loyalty, betrayal, and redemption would test them both, the story set its moral compass clearly, that progress in any era Wild West or modern world begins when someone has the courage to speak discomfort aloud and someone else has the humility to listen, even when it hurts. The eyes of a town that pretended not to see. By the time the sun dipped behind the low hills and painted the frontier sky in burnt orange and tired gold, word of the accusation had already escaped the ranch and taken on a life of its own. Because in small towns, information never travels straight. It bends and warps like heat over dirt. And Elias Crow learned quickly that morality is often judged not by truth, but by convenience. As some men laughed it off as harmless looking, others defended him loudly, without ever asking what Mara felt, and a few quieter voices asked questions that mattered but were afraid to stand alone. While Mara, walking through the town with her head held high, understood that education is not just the teaching of letters but the courage to challenge social habits that hide behind tradition. And as children followed her with curious eyes and women watched from doorways weighing safety against silence, she realized how often society trains people to minimize discomfort when it threatens established comfort. A lesson as old as power itself, and Elias, forced into the unfamiliar role of being observed rather than observer, began to notice how often he himself had benefited from assumptions that excused him without examination. How often he had accepted respect as inheritance rather than responsibility. And when the town meeting finally erupted under the pretense of settling unrest, it became clear that most people were less interested in justice than in restoring normalcy, because normalcy allowed them to avoid reflection. Yet the true twist of the night came when Elias spoke not to defend himself but to acknowledge the harm of unchecked behavior, admitting that intent does not erase impact, and that dignity is not something one person grants another but something everyone must protect. In this moment, small and imperfect, became a moral turning point, teaching the crowd and the audience that accountability is not weakness, but the foundation of trust. That real strength lies in the willingness to unlearn harmful habits. And that progress, whether on a dusty frontier or in a modern society, depends on individuals choosing growth over pride. Because when communities fail to confront everyday wrongs, they create systems where greater injustices thrive. And as Mara listened without triumph and Elias spoke without excuses, the town was quietly educated in a way no book could teach, that respect begins when we believe people's experiences, that morality requires action rather than denial, and that a society unwilling to examine itself is doomed to repeat its failures under different names, setting the stage for deeper tests ahead where words alone would no longer be enough and character would be measured by sacrifice rather than speeches. What a man gives up to stand, right? The real test of morality, Elias discovered, did not arrive in public meetings or spoken apologies, but in the quiet costs that followed, because accountability that changes nothing is only theater. And when the town's largest cattle buyer quietly withdrew his contracts, citing discomfort with trouble, Elias faced a truth the frontier rarely admitted. Doing the right thing often makes life harder before it makes it better. Yet instead of retreating into resentment, he chose a harder education, learning that ethical growth demands sacrifice. That respect is proven by consistent behavior rather than singular moments of courage, and so he altered the ranch's routines, instituting clear boundaries, shared authority, and expectations that dignity was not negotiable, regardless of gender or status. Changes that drew ridicule from neighboring ranchers who mistook cruelty for toughness, while Mara, watching these actions unfold, recognized another lesson worth teaching, that redemption is not owed but earned, and that forgiveness, when it comes, must be rooted in evidence of change, not pressure to move on. And as tensions escalated when a powerful land syndicate attempted to exploit the town's Division II C's property through legal manipulation, a deeper twist emerged. Injustice thrives most effectively when communities are distracted by minimizing personal harms, because moral blindness at small scales enables exploitation at larger ones. And it was only when men and women stood together, informed by the uncomfortable conversations sparked earlier, that they recognized how respect, transparency, and accountability formed the backbone of collective resistance, teaching that ethical awareness is not isolated to personal behavior, but extends into economic and political choices. And when Elias refused a profitable but unethical deal, Thatwold have secured his future at the expense of others. He demonstrated that character is revealed not by what we gain, but by what we are willing to lose, reinforcing a core moral truth valuable to any era: integrity is cumulative, built through repeated decisions aligned with conscience. And societies grow stronger not by silencing discomfort, but by allowing it to guide reform, preparing both the town and the reader for the final reckoning where lasting change would demand unity, humility, and the courage to protect principles even when no reward is guaranteed. The land remembers what people try to forget. When the syndicate's final attempt to fracture the town collapsed under the weight of shared resolve, the victory felt quieter than anyone expected, because true justice rarely arrives with celebration but with relief. And in the weeks that followed, Elias and Mara understood that the deepest change had not been written into contracts or laws, but into habits, conversations, and expectations. As men corrected one another when old behaviors resurfaced, women spoke more freely without bracing for dismissal, and children learned by observation that respect was not a performance reserved for authority, but a daily practice owed to everyone. And Elias, now aware that leadership is measured by the environment it creates, accepted that his past could not be erased, but his future could be shaped. Choosing to mentor younger hands not just in ranch work but in responsibility, teaching them that strength without empathy becomes domination, while Mara, whose greatest lesson had always been that education must evolve with experience, expanded her teaching beyond the classroom, reminding the town that morality is not static tradition, but a living agreement. We must continually renegotiate to include those once ignored. And the final twist revealed itself, not as romance or revenge, but as transformation. As the ranch and town became known not for scandal but for fairness, illustrating a timeless truth valuable far beyond the Wild West, society's progress when individuals accept its discomfort as a teacher rather than an enemy, when accountability is embraced as growth instead of punishment, and when dignity is protected not because it is demanded but because it is deserved. And as the land settled back into its rhythms, carrying memory in its soil, the story closed with a quiet moral echo meant for every era and every era.
Adios.
That change begins when we choose awareness over denial, and that the legacy we leave is determined not by power or pride, but by the courage to stand right, even when it costs us something, reminding us that progress, whether on a frontier or in modern life, is never accidental, but always a choice.